And there were just a lot of people in the church who have not only seen unidentified craft in the skies, sometimes very close. There are a lot of people who have had problems with abduction experiences. Some not so bad, some not so good.
Hi there, welcome to Space for Faith. I'm your host, Matt, and I'm here today with author James Thompson, and we're excited to have you, so thank you for spending some time with us this afternoon. I'm going to introduce you a little bit, and then you can introduce yourself and if there's anything I missed, okay? But James Thompson, who has a Juris Doctorate, is an award-winning nonfiction writer and well-known professional ghostwriter. He writes the books of the nation's top business, organizational, and political leaders and has ghostwritten over 90 books, including biographies, memoirs, histories, and motivational books, as well as books about politics, medicine, law, society, and religion. All of this reflects that James enjoys the company and insights of the world's most interesting and successful people, and he catalogs their experiences, perceptions, and techniques for success in a collection of unique works. James enjoys hiking, traveling, cooking, boating, and being a father. He also writes books about paranormal phenomena, as well as religious historical fictions. He recently co-wrote a young adult teen sleuth book with his daughter Bridget Thompson, titled The Britt Axton Mysteries. And he holds a Juris Doctor degree from J. Reuben Clark School of Law and a Bachelor's of Arts degree in Humanities. He has served as articles editor for the BYU Law Review and associate editor of a leading state bar organization's CLE publications. He's a leading national seminar speaker and has served as editor-in-chief of the nation's premier writing firm. Did I miss anything?
No, it was way too much.
All right. Well, we're really glad. I'm really glad that James agreed to come on, and it's great that he can be here in person. We happen to live in the same area in Mesa, Arizona. It's a beautiful day. We're recording this on February 11th for those of you in cold country, but it's 80 degrees outside, so it's like, sunny with some clouds in the sky, and so you can enjoy that and live through us. But so I think to get started, real quick before we just some business items for people that enjoy the podcast. One of the recent podcasts I've been listening to that I would encourage you to look to is Michael B. Rush's podcast, Black Swan Rising. You can find that, I think, on Apple Podcasts is where I'm listening to it. And then if you have any, please send me messages online if you're interested in any particular topic of discussion or guest for the show. So James, one of the things that I want to help our listeners understand is how you were at the cutting edge of the UFO topic, especially for Christians. And so I wonder if you could tell us about your first book briefly, what year you published it, and why you got into that.
Well, my first book was, almost 35 years ago, and it was specifically to an LDS audience. I wrote it and wondered if anybody would publish it, and it's a funny story, but the important part was I asked, through letter, Elder Monson at the time, and I just asked, is this something that the church would support or look down on, or before I publish, just let me know, because I don't want to step on any toes or do anything that the church disapproves of. So I did receive a letter back, and it was just a simple, no problem. Go ahead and find a publisher. It's okay. So I thought, okay. So I jumped through that hoop. It's not like the CIA having to go through and scrub a book before it's published, but I just didn't want to get anybody upset with me.
Right.
And before that, the reason I thought about writing a book on the subject is because Christians generally don't believe that there's life beyond this planet. And so anything that seems unhuman is automatically demonic. It's got to be from the devil. And I didn't know if that was right. It didn't seem right to me. You know, I was raised on Will Robinson, Lost in Space, and I thought, no, I think that there are other people out there. And in fact, the scriptures, you know, my book opens up with the scriptures that talk about there are worlds without number, and how many are those? Well, if you could count the grains of sand on the seashore, that wouldn't even be a beginning. So I'm thinking trillions, because there's a lot of sand on the seashore, and that's not even the beginning. And then, interestingly, in the Doctrine and Covenants, the Lord tells Joseph Smith, and each one of those planets I populate with my children, the Lord tells him, and they are begotten sons and daughters to me. And Joseph explains that they're all going through the same process that we are. You know, they live their lives, they die, they're resurrected, they go on to whatever category, whatever level of glory that they've attained to in their lives. So I thought, well, chances are there are other people out there, and some might be visiting here. I don't know if they're visiting here or not, but there are people who purport to see craft that aren't ours. There are people who purport to have encounters with beings that aren't exactly like us. Sometimes they are, sometimes they aren't. But they do purport, you know, they self-report that they're from other planets. Well, I don't know. No one's ever talked to me. But I had a missionary companion who opened up to me. And he said, Elder Thompson, I had an experience where I had a seeing eye dog that I was taking care of while somebody went on vacation. And I was walking along getting the full effect, you know, with his eyes closed. He said the dog stopped. And then he didn't move, so he opened his eyes to look at the dog, and the dog was looking up, so he looked up. Now, they were in a new construction area, a new residential construction. He said the house just in front of him, there was a classic saucer UFO right above it. And he looked, he said he could hardly believe it. He said, and then it did something that was even more unbelievable. He said it zipped over to the next house so fast that he could hardly see that it had moved. It looked like it just disappeared and reappeared, but it just zipped that fast. And then he said, as he was now really spellbound by what was going on, it zipped back to its original position. Then after a few seconds, it took off. And it's like he could see it move, but it moved so far that it was out of sight in less than 1 second. So we're talking tens of thousands of miles an hour. And it made no wind, made no sonic boom. And he told me this encounter, this experience of his, with the same solemn, almost testimony that he used to share his witness of the gospel to the people that we taught. And so I believed him. So I said, well, what do I do with that information? I've got to write a book. But like I say, and there was another, there was something else that happened before my mission. Our stake patriarch had a fireside for the youth, and he talked about a brother in the stake who had had an experience and a close encounter. He saw the craft, and then he saw the men. He spent 2 hours with them. They talked. They answered his questions. They showed him around the craft, and then they took off. And again, that lasted 2 hours, so he had a lot of information.
And just to interject momentarily on that topic, so was that Udo?
Udo Wartena, yes.
Yeah, and what's interesting is for the listeners, you can go to the podcast Area 52, and just within the last couple months, I believe that podcasters Chris Ramsey did an episode about that very story. And I think that's really interesting that he shared it at Fireside. I can't really see that happening today.
Well,
please keep going.
No one had ever heard of it before this.
Yeah.
Udo had kept it quiet. The only time he decided to talk about it, now this was in 1940, by the way, when it happened. The only time he decided to talk about it was back in the 1970s, I believe, when America was going through an energy crisis. And he thought maybe Senator John Glenn, who had been an astronaut, would be open enough to hear what I have to say. I'll tell him my story, and I'll tell him what they told me about how they generate energy, because perhaps that information will help government scientists get down the road on creating free energy, or at least this type of energy that it was explained to him. So he wrote a letter to John Glenn, and he explained what had happened, and he told them about how they generate anti-gravity and how they fill their batteries with energy. And so we found that letter after I published the first book almost 35 years ago. All I had was, at the time, just notes from an interview that our patriarch's son had done with Udo Wartena. But as you say, after my book was published, that experience was generally reported, ended up in many books, on many shows, many podcasts. In fact, MUFON, the Mutual UFO Network, published a paper within 2 years of my book coming out, and it talked about that particular experience and called it, I think, the most significant and important humanoid encounter on record. All from that little fireside.
Which is a good point, because these aliens that Mr. Wartena reported looked like us.
Yes, they looked exactly like us. The only thing that was different was one looked like he was in his 30s. The other one looked like he was maybe closer to 50. But in the course of their conversation, they revealed to him that the younger one was actually, I think, around 500, and the older one was around 800 years old. And they spoke many languages, and they talked about a program that they had to come to Earth to test people, samples, to make sure everything was okay. And they said that they try not to interfere, but they sometimes interfere a little bit just to nudge us in the right direction. And I thought that was very interesting. So with those two experiences under my belt, somewhat fresh off my mission, I'd been through law school when I was a young practicing attorney. But I thought, you know what? None of the Christians believe that there are really UFOs. It appears that there really are UFOs with people on board who may or may not be exactly like us. We don't know. And that's around the time when communion came out. And so the small grays were suddenly very popular. And people were thinking, okay, there are these weird abductions going on. And it was right around the time that Bob Lazar revealed that he had been working at S4 at Area 51. So I thought, maybe the members of the church, which were, well, whatever it was, 13 million at the time, maybe they should have at least an idea of what's going on out there so they can make up their own minds. And especially when it came to things like abductions and things, there was just no one was talking about. For instance, a member of the church who had had an abduction had no one to talk to. Because they would go to the bishop, and the bishop would say, I don't know what to say. And, general authorities weren't sure what to say, so that's why I decided we needed to write the first book and get it out in the open, talk about it from a revealed gospel viewpoint. So what has the prophet Joseph Smith said on the subject? What have other prophets and brethren said on the subject? What do the scriptures say? Just so we could establish a baseline for what's possible and what's not. What is life in the universe like? Are there mantoids, with mind control powers? I don't know, but they purport, people purport to encounter them, and it's usually not an uplifting experience. So we talk about the possibilities and what's probable, what's not probable, and I thought that was an interesting discussion to start in the church. Yeah. Now here we are 35 years later.
Yeah, and let's hold up your book.
This is the latest.
Yeah, so Worlds Without Number by J.L. Thompson or James Thompson. This is your most recent book. What year was this published?
About 3 years ago.
About 3 years ago.
Yeah.
Now, for those of you who are interested in reading your book, and I read the book front to back. I thoroughly enjoyed it.
Sorry it was so long.
No, it's good. But you did tell me, don't worry about reading the first one, which was UFOs, messengers.
Yeah, aliens and UFOs, messengers or deceivers, because it's essentially contained in this version.
Okay. So you'd recommend we start with this one. It's more up to date.
Yes.
And okay. And so, but I encourage everybody interested to read the book.
A lot has happened in the last 35 years.
Yeah.
In fact, a lot has happened in the last 3 or 4 years since this book came out.
Yeah. Well, and that's part of the point I'm trying to get across to our listeners is like that's what I'm saying when you were the cutting edge. I mean, this is 35 years ago you wrote the first book. Shortly after Whitley Strieber wrote Communion, which really popularized, I think, this whole, aliens and UFOs phenomenon. And you were right there, addressing this issue for members of the church. So good job for you. And I really appreciate that you did that. And I really appreciate the insights in the book.
I'll tell you this, there was a payoff after the book came out. And it was published by a church publisher, Dwayne Crowther over at Horizon, picked it up and published it. He wasn't sure, but the people on his staff were saying, no, this is the wave right now. People need to know what's going on. So he allowed it. Then it was their top seller for 2 years. But I did get the call to come into church headquarters. And I thought, uh-oh, this could go, 2 or 3 ways. But they called me in, they told me specifically that there was tacit approval at the highest levels for what I was sharing, and that those at the highest levels were using the information in my book to counsel members of the church who had encounters, especially very close encounters and abductions. They were using that information to counsel people, and they were using the priesthood to protect them. Thank goodness.
Yeah. So, if you don't mind, and I'm not trying to put you on the spot, but would you share with the listeners a little bit about, where are you at right now in terms of your beliefs, based on the research you've done, the books you've written, the life you've lived? What are some of your core beliefs about, maybe both, if you're willing to share some of what your faith is in God, and then also what you think about what's going on with you? Is it real? Are UFOs real? Are aliens really visiting us? What are your thoughts?
Well, that's a big question, isn't it? In fact, that's the question of the day. I mean, I've heard it said many times, and even on like Jeremy Corbell's show the other day, I think someone said, well, the 2 big questions of life are, what happens to us after this life is over, and are we alone in the universe? And you just kind of asked me both questions at the same time, and I'm supposed to give an answer. But I have thought about it, as you know, and I have discussed with a lot of people. A lot of people don't realize that a lot of church members have had these encounters. After my book came out, we could start tracking now, and people start getting in touch with the author. My publisher would give me all the mail. And there were just a lot of people in the church who have not only seen unidentified craft in the skies, sometimes very close. There are a lot of people who have had problems with abduction experiences. Some not so bad, some not so good. So, in fact, there was a couple who came to me after my book. They were sent by the Relief Society president. And their case is now very famous. And, they do television programs about it. But that is Steve and Dawn Hess. And they came to me and told me about their experience. And it was horrible. It was horrific. And as in so many cases, after the initial encounter out in the Mojave Desert, in my book I call it the Mojave Triangle, after that experience for years, for at least a couple of years, they had encounters in their home, and the children were involved, and that wasn't good. So I sent them to the bishop and their other priesthood leaders, and then they reported back that after some blessing, they stopped. And it makes you wonder, too, because a lot of people have what we term nuts and bolts craft sighting experiences. It doesn't even have to be close. Maybe they saw it, over on the horizon far away, and then it just zipped away or something. And then they find that in the next few days, things start happening in their lives, especially around the house and things, poltergeist-like experiences. Things levitating, things going missing and then being put back, maybe in the same place, maybe in a different place. Just what we call poltergeist experiences, where abnormal, paranormal events in their lives begin to occur. And it's obvious that nobody in the house is doing it. It's obvious that something weird is going on. I'll just give you a quick example. Bob Bigelow, the aerospace magnate and hotel magnate, he was very interested in these subjects, and he bought Skinwalker Ranch, and then he ran it for years, and he was receiving funding from the government to conduct experiments there. But the thing would follow him home, as it has many others, especially the military people and things, but it followed him home, and he and his family started experiencing poltergeist activity. And he tells a story of one time in his house, which was a big house, the staircases and things, but they had a big table downstairs, and they had a lot of candies in boxes because some event was coming up, like Halloween or something like that. And he said, this is one example of hundreds that happened. But they were upstairs getting ready for bed, and all of a sudden they could hear that table had collapsed, and all of those gumballs and all of the things were bouncing across the floor. And they go, oh no, what happened? So they were running downstairs, and they looked. Everything is stacked neatly on the table. Well, from my viewpoint, because of some experiences I've had and because of the many people I've interviewed, I wonder, did everything actually spill out and make the noise, and then was it put back? Or was this just some kind of psychic communication, some kind of psychic download giving them the experience that something had happened? I know that happens, and it makes me wonder if most paranormal experiences are of that kind. I mean, we see people running around with weird gadgets on TV, right? Ghost hunting. And I just kind of go, oh, no, don't humiliate yourself like this. But, a lot of people are into it. But, oh, no, something touched me. Yeah. So anyway, I do wonder, though, if those kinds of people sometimes have real experiences, or because not much shows up on camera, right. Or if furniture moves. I'm saying, look, I have young daughters. Anything that they could reproduce with some fishing line, I'm not buying it. Yeah. So, and it turns out, I've never seen anything on TV that my daughters couldn't reproduce with some fishing line. All right. So, all that aside, I have had experiences of my own that, let me give you an example. I was with some friends. I was around 12 years old. I call this the tent experience. So the girls take me to the backyard of some boys that I knew from school. I was new in town. It was in Portland, Oregon. I had only been there a few weeks, but they were being nice to me. They were including me. So they walked me over, and they said something about, yeah, we're going to have a little party here. We're going to, maybe have some beers or something. And I didn't want any part of that. Of course, I was a young LDS guy. So I just said, oh, no, you girls, you stay here. I've walked you over here safely, and now I'll leave you here. But there was this big tent in the backyard, the old Army-style tent with the flaps that come down in the front, canvas. So I said, I'll see you tomorrow at that thing. And everybody said, okay. So they walked into the tent, and just as the flaps were going, I thought, oh, no, I have something else I'm doing tomorrow. So I don't want them to think that I stand them up. So I just said, I liked one or two steps away as the flaps were going down. I thought, oh, I better inform them. So I stepped back, and I opened up the tent, and I said, and before I get all of the word I out, I saw something that is entirely inexplicable in its source. And what I saw was, it was the earth it looked like, but it was another time of day. It looked like late evening. This is the morning. but it looked like late evening inside of the tent. And I could see everything. I could see the sky with the colors, the hues changing, becoming somewhat dark. I could see trees on the other side, and then that entire hillside came down in front of me, and then it came up to me. And I could see on the ground in front of me, but although I wasn't looking, I could see that there was more growth and just ground there. I could hear, some water flowing. I could hear animal sounds, birds mainly. The trees were mixed. Some were kind of fir, some were which was what I was used to in Oregon. But some were kind of tropical. And I thought, what is this? And I just looked and took it all in. And I said, what's going on? Because I could really see it three-dimensional as far as the eye could see. The main body of the trees and the thing, you could only see so far because it was only a couple hundred yards away at the most, maybe 100 yards at the most. But I thought, what is going on? So, my head was inside, so I looked back out, and I looked around, just a baseline, make sure everything was as it should be. Birds on the lines, flowers in the flower bed, grass, garage over there, a house behind me. And then I said, okay, this is all right. And I looked at the tent. It was about 8 feet deep. I thought, there's something very unnatural about it. So I went back in, and I looked around. I looked up. Everything was as though I were in that other world. And at that point, I noticed that kind of over in front of me near the edge, there was a girl sitting there. She had no clothes on. She had long black hair. It looked black. It might have been dark brown. But one of the girls that had gone in was very pretty and had long dark hair. So I thought, could that be her? And I looked, because I had never seen a young woman like that before. And the only thing that was different, unnatural, let's say, was that she seemed to have a tiny bit of a glow about her. But otherwise, it looked just like a human with no clothes on sitting there facing away from me. And I looked at her, and I looked around, and I just made sure that what I was seeing. And I decided, whatever this is, I can't see any advantage to remaining here. Now, I've since become acquainted with David Paulides, all the missing people. I don't know if people realize, but about 600,000 people go missing in America every year. And thank goodness, 90% are eventually accounted for. So, but what does that tell us? 60,000 people are never accounted for again. And, over a 10-year period, that's over 500,000 Americans that are never heard from again. No sign. The clothes are never found. The brackets on their gear are never found. Nothing. So I kind of wonder, in retrospect, if that was, like a lure, some kind of bait to get me to go into that other world, whatever it was. And so I just closed the tent flaps, and I turned around. I walked away. I tested everything all the way home. I was about 10 to 15 minutes from home. I would touch everything. I would look. I'd make sure I was, because the thought came to me, maybe the girls somehow, rubbed some LSD on me or something like that, and that's why I was tripping, But there were no other weird experiences or perceptions. Everything was perfectly normal. So now I have to ask myself the same question that we were asking before. Did I actually see something that was there, or was a vision of something downloaded into my psyche? Either way, I instinctively knew that the kids who had walked into the tent, the 4 of them, didn't see me walking in and looking around. And sure enough, on Monday, nobody said anything to me. But I went home and I reported that to my mother, told her everything that had happened so that I wouldn't go to sleep and then wonder for the rest of my life if I had dreamed it. So those are the types of experiences that people are having. Mine was unique in its own way. I think I might have just been one of those 60,000 people that year if I hadn't had the insight, probably the spiritual help to turn around and go the other direction. But it does make me wonder. I've had some other experiences. I had a demonic infestation experience that I have in the book. typical, you're going to perform a priesthood blessing, and then somebody starts talking, in 30 or 40 voices at the same time. And what the voices had to say were how much they hated Joseph Smith, how much they hated the gospel, the restoration, the church, its leaders, how much they hated me, my family, how they were going to do everything they could to destroy me. Now, unfortunately, it was just me and the possessed person there, so there wasn't a third party to tell me, James, you really heard those things, or no, I didn't hear it, but you heard it. So I don't know if it was an actual exterior experience or just a psychic download. And I'm not doubting myself, because I don't have psychological breaks but I've had 3 or 4 interesting experiences in my life like that tell me that there's much more to life than just walking and looking at the clouds and the trees. And let's face it, most of us like the thought that life is only walking through life, and the hard things and the soft things, but there's nothing weird. People don't like to face the fact that there are other things going on, that there are other beings, that there are other creatures, that there are other, that we're not at the top of the totem pole or at the top of the food chain necessarily. So I have kind of become the messenger of, be careful, be aware. It may be like the South Americans as the conquistadors rolled up on shore. Maybe we should be a little bit careful with these things. They seem to, whatever they are, they seem to have a message for us. And that message is something I've studied at length as well. Again, it's not just nuts and bolts. Yeah, you can get your BB gun and you can shoot a BB off of one of these. I've recorded people who've shot bullets off of them. It makes a noise and it makes them upset. They'll either take off or they'll get you with a beam or something. But a lot of church members have had these experiences, and I believe them. I just don't know if they're real, tangible experiences they're having, or if they're demonic, let's say, downloads. Which gets me back to my original position. Other Christian churches didn't believe that there was anything going on, because there were no creatures. There's only us and God and Satan. So I set out to show that there were more options. But in the end, I often wonder if there are more options. Because, as I say, even the most nuts and bolts experiences that I or others have had, usually others, it can turn into something else very quickly, as I say. You can see something off in the distance, and then you can start having bedroom encounters with little gray aliens with big black eyes within a couple of days. And it's hard to know what the connection is. Why would real beings from other galaxies, or other solar systems at least, why would they be interested in following you home and making these things happen? Or it's not always other beings. And as I say, it can just be these experiences, poltergeist-type paranormal experiences of, like in a Spielberg movie, the chairs are suddenly stacked in the kitchen, and you go, what the heck is going on here?
What would be your advice then for, you have someone who's Christian and they want to preserve their faith, but then, they're coming to the realization that, as you said, there's other beings out there. There's the world is more complicated than maybe we would hope that it was. So, and especially, one of my concerns is if there was a future disclosure where the U.S. government acknowledges whatever they need to do for people to commonly accept that this is a real phenomenon, that it's in our reality and it's real in and of itself. That could potentially shake some people's faith if they don't know where to put it. So, what recommendations do you have for preparing for that type of thing?
Well, there are 2 main categories of those people that I see: those in the church and those outside of the church. Those in the church have the revelations that tell them that there are other people out there, so don't be surprised if you encounter one someday. The gospel doesn't tell us about any prohibitions on visiting other planets. So it could be happening. So don't let it shake your faith if it is. Understand that. Well, but what if it's, as I say, what if it's a big mantoid who's running roughshod over you during the experience, and that's something different. What if it's these small grays? Is that human? Are those children of Heavenly Father? Are those biomechanical robots being built by another race? But then we're told that those little ones, even if they are biomechanical robots, they're being built and commanded by big ones that look somewhat like them. So are those human? What is human? What is the image of God? On our own planet, we have, big Watusis, we have little pygmies, and we have kind of everything in between. We have 2 eyes, 2 ears, a nose, a mouth. But strangely, even these beings, no matter how unhuman they are, they still appear to have 2 eyes, 2 ears, a nose, and a mouth, arms, hands-ish, legs, even the insects, even the lizard people, the reptilians. I have some illustrations that some experiencers who are artists have shared with me, and I recommend that people look to see what they have seen with their own eyes. The illustrations are very good, and so you go, are those human or are those something else? And it kind of takes us back to our own Earth history when perhaps before the flood, which is perhaps the reason for the flood, when there appeared to be some genetic experimentation going on. And that's perhaps why the creatures and beings that we see, no matter how animalistic they are in their appearance, they seem to have a base of humanity that somebody started out with. Again, we don't know what's true and what's not, but we do know that people are seeing these things. And we look back at ancient Egypt and we see that, we see drawings of people with dog heads and bird heads, and not unlike some of the bedroom visitations we're seeing these days.
Well, thank you for that insight.
Oh, please, let me finish.
Yeah.
I only told about the LDS category. On the non-LDS category, I have seen, since my first book came out, things have been moving in the direction of acceptance that something's going on, and even acceptance that we are not the only creation of God. This earth is not the center of the universe, which was the old Catholic canon for centuries. And if you said otherwise, you might end up on the business end of a fire. Those who talked about, well, the earth is not the center of the solar system. The sun is, off to the fire. And we lost a lot of good minds that way. So anyway, there has been movement that I've noticed in the writings, in the literature, in the discussions, now with podcasts and things. People are starting to accept that God is the God of the universe. And perhaps this isn't his only plantation, his only garden. Perhaps he has other gardens elsewhere where he puts his children. And I've noticed specifically the Catholic Church has come out with a group of experts who are telling, who are giving advice, saying there appears to be other children of God on other planets. And so we've heard the Pope come out in the last 5 years and say, well, if aliens show up, we're willing to baptize them. So I think it's expanded. And so it's just a matter of expanding your understanding of the gospel, your understanding of who God is and what God does, and that he is the God of the universe, not just of our little world, and that he has children on worlds without number, and they're all begotten sons and daughters of his. I would just say, open your mind up, open your heart up, open your spirit up to that information, that God has many children, and many of them perhaps are visiting us. If it's not them, then what is it? It might be demons. It might be something else. It might be something that we don't even know is here. I often think about, what do deer know? Deer are deer created by God. They have spirits, but they don't know anything about us. I have a little dog who doesn't understand anything about anything. I mean, it really relies on me to stay alive. And I call it in to eat, and it looks at me like it doesn't know what I'm saying. So, I think we may be like that to some other creature that God has created, and he just hasn't told us about it. He does talk about where there's one level of intelligence. Hey, don't be surprised to find out that there's going to be a higher level of intelligence. And hey, Cupcake, there's even a higher level of intelligence than that. So where are we in that intelligence level? I don't know, but I do know that the scriptures tell us that God's ways are not our ways, and God's mind is not our mind, and that God's thinking and God's ways are higher than ours, as the heavens are above the earth. Yeah. Now, the heavens are really high above the earth, That place nearest Kolob where Heavenly Father's base seems to be, that's a long ways away. And he's way higher than the earth, so he and his ways and his thinking are that much higher than mine. I do my best, and I figure a few things out, but whatever's God's got going, I have a lot to learn, and probably won't happen in this lifetime.
Yeah, thank you, and I think that I appreciate your insights, and they're valid, and I feel like something I would share for people not of our faith would be to consider reading Timothy Alberino's book Birthright. Have you read that?
No.
By chance? That's a good one. But he's not he's not a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. But not only does he tie in the UFO phenomenon, but he also ties in kind of what you were mentioning about the pre-flood world and what was happening there, like things that were brought forth by the Book of Enoch.
And those things may have relevance today. They may not. Those are the kinds of things that we don't have a testimony about because the Lord has not been direct in his revelations. We have pieces from the Old Testament, even from the New Testament, certainly through the prophet Joseph Smith, the books of Enoch that have been discovered since then. But it's an interesting study, what happened before the flood, and if it has returned and is now setting the stage for the second coming, but before that, for the coming of the beast, the man of sin, the Antichrist. There very well may be powers at work on earth. And this may be part of it.
What do you mean?
Well, we read in the scriptures that God will allow a great delusion in the last days. And it uses the word delusion. Well, what does that mean? We become deluded. We believe things that aren't true, but we embrace them as though they were true, and we live our lives accordingly. Well, could the UFO phenomenon be a delusion? Could be. It could be. Could it be satanic, and he's using it? Maybe he's mimicking something that actually is true. He knows that God creates worlds without number. He could set up a stage, and the players on it and the little craft on it show us that, again, I talk about the messaging of the beings in the craft that talk to people. Much of the messaging is about our spirituality and us becoming something different, us raising our vibrational level and making the leap to the next dimension, for instance. And there's often discussion about, the Holy One is coming. The galactic Messiah is coming. Sure, Jesus was a Messiah, but the Messiah is coming. And it's interesting how often this is the message that's being relayed to the experiencers. And now they go out and set up their cults, they set up their religions, and they all kind of belong to the same one because they've all been given the same message. And then it goes out in books, it goes out in podcasts. Next thing you know, you have, a few 100 million people believing that the great galactic Messiah is coming and that we need to prepare ourselves. And, that's just not It's just not true. It's a delusion. So could that be the great delusion? It could be. And if so, we're going to see more of it, and it's going to take a more prominent role in our lives over the next few decades, if not before that. Things that were going on during the beginning and during the Adam years and then up to the flood. We've talked a little bit about the Watchers. A lot of people talk about the Watchers these days. And I might just say, for those who study such things as fallen angels, there are two categories of fallen angels. There is the 1/3 of the hosts of heaven that were cast out and down to the earth. And they bug us a lot. We read about that in church history. But there were also 200 of the Watchers that departed from their calling, their high and holy calling, to help Adam and the children of the earth become organized and learn the cultural arts and things. And they wanted to marry earth women. Now, again, I don't have a firm and fast testimony of this. I only know that it is in the books of Enoch, in the book of the Watchers. And then they had children, and those children became the giants, and they were very problematic, and they revealed a lot of sciences to the children of Adam that the Lord did not permit, which led to the flood. And their theme was constantly to undermine humanity and to undermine the plan of salvation and exaltation, to destroy it. And with that understanding, as you read about the encounters, not only with UFOs and their occupants, but with the fairy folk of old, in the old country, they often had the same message and the same appearance and disappearance and the same philosophies and things. So that's something we need to be aware of. We need to understand what the messaging is, what the presentation is, and decipher if it's real or not, or what its purpose is. And that's really why I've written my book, is to discuss the purpose and warn the saints. This may be happening, or something's happening. It may be what it appears, or it may be something else. Pray for the Spirit so that you know.
And then just a curiosity question: Do you? And I'm not looking for names or even necessarily, but do you feel like, are you aware of people who are members of the church that still experience the phenomenon from the standpoint of what we would call like alien abduction? Are there members of the church that you're aware of that this is something that's happening in their life, and for whatever reason it's never gone away? Like, no names, but no. I mean, is okay. That like the question? I guess is what I'm trying to help.
Well, the answer to your question is yes, if that helps. It's people are having experiences. And to my understanding, as soon as they get their priesthood leaders involved, those experiences tend to stop. I can't say that's 100% true one way or the other, but as I receive feedback, the little guy sitting in a dark room at his desk, pretending he knows things while he types on his computer and sends out books and these kinds of things. The feedback I'm getting back is the priesthood does appear to protect people who have been having these experiences, but I can't say that's always true. The problem is most people having those experiences are living in pain, in the darkness, because they're so afraid to tell anybody what's going on. They tell somebody and somebody says, oh, that's, you're having a schizoid break or something, or you're just dreaming it, or you're just making it up, and then they just shut right up. Believe me, I know I've been there, when you have something to say. I had brothers and sisters who lied. So I know what it's like when you just shut up because, you're not being believed. But this is very hurtful, very painful experience to be attacked like this, either physically, psychically, or spiritually, whatever it is. And it's hard to figure out. I mean, I've talked with people who are very nuts and bolts, and then they set up, and then they say, and the next thing that happened, I woke up in my bed as this nuts and bolts thing was going on, and they're sure that they weren't in their bed when this thing was happening. So anyway, we don't know, but people are suffering from it, and I just want to encourage them to talk to their priesthood leaders. I mean, this book is basically a manual for priesthood leaders in the church. And if they would read it and understand, then they could counsel the people in their ward. I've talked to people who were in church leadership who never heard of the book, who never heard of the phenomena, who were completely unaware that the church knows what's going on. And I said, yeah, you should. Well, I think that the church might want to be more aggressive in letting church leadership know. In fact, even talking about it at a state conference or maybe general conference, just saying, hey, there are things in the world that we don't quite understand. The Lord understands them, and he gives us the tools to deal with them. But if you have experiences that you don't understand, please feel free to talk to your bishop. As I say, that couple came to me because of their Relief Society president who believed them. And then, again, television programs have been made depicting the experience that they had.
Well, I think that's great advice, and I think that's very important, because that's been one of the concerns that I've expressed. I've been trying to get across in my podcast is I want for members of the church, especially, but for Christians in general, to be able to reconcile this without having, one of the things they talk about a lot in the UFO world is the ontological shock. It shatters your worldview, and so if things happen, I don't want people to feel like this is irreconcilable. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? And so I appreciate what you've done.
No, it's very much part of the gospel, as far as I know. Yeah. There's a television personality and researcher named Ben Hansen, Hansen. He's a member of the church. He's one of the top in the field. And he recently went back to do a master's program. And as his thesis, he revisited the original, I think it was the Brookings Institute, that we better not reveal this to the public because everybody would go crazy and faith would collapse and institutions would collapse. He revisited it, and all of his data show that people are very ready to accept it. So I think that we in the church should accept the fact that people have these experiences, or maybe it is psychological, but if so, they should feel free to talk about it so that they get whatever help they need, because everybody wants help, no matter what the source. If little beings are coming and taking you away at night, you need help. If you're having delusions, you need help. So, and there's no shame in it. But so many sane people are having the experiences that it's not even really a question anymore. It's not in my mind anyway. It hasn't been since my missionary companion essentially bore his witness to me of what he had seen. And then I knew it was true.
Well, I really appreciate our conversation. Is there anything else you wanted to talk about or bring up or plug your books or whatever you would like to say before we finish?
Well, I have a few books. I have a couple of websites. I'm a ghostwriter, so I'm always looking for new business, right? So put my links on your your pages, okay? I don't want them to have to listen to me. I've studied it more than most members of the church have. There are some other church members, though, who know a lot and have had experiences, perhaps, like Travis Walton. I've spent time with him. And, maybe they're the ones that people want to listen to instead of me. But I've done my best to at least put the information in our hands collectively so that we can at least have a discussion openly about it, and it's not hidden in the shadows where there's only pain and grief.
Right.
That's my message. Let's talk about it.
Yeah. Thanks, James. We'll wrap up for today, and I really appreciate your time and coming on Space for Faith.
I appreciate you having me. Thanks.
And we'll keep in touch. For the listeners, I've mentioned in the past that you can go and look at my few blog posts on uapactionplan.com, and you can also email me at blogger@uapactionplan.com. Anyway, we hope you have a beautiful spring.
Thanks.